Okay, welcome everybody to Just Talking About Jesus. I have Ruth Cowles here today. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you.
Nice to have you here. Um, could you, Sarah, just give us a little bit of your background, your who you are, a little bio?
Okay, all right. Well, I'm a wife and a mother and a grandmother and a great grandmother. Um, I've married 50 years to my husband, Peter, and we have three adult children who have brought three wonderful spouses into our family. And um, there's seven children, so seven grandchildren. And
Mhm.
our oldest granddaughter, next to oldest granddaughter, just had her first son. So, and due to have her second child this year. So we are just adding to the family. My husband and I spent 17 years in Africa as missionaries. And then we moved to Kansas. I'm from Pennsylvania originally. So, and so is he. And so Kansas was like a whole new area for us, uncharted ground, right? So we're here. We've been here a number of years now, and I was on a church staff here as the minister to women. Um, did a lot of teaching, counseling, leadership things on the church staff. And then I retired. And since I left my job, um, you don't really ever retire,
Yeah,
right? I mean, I
you
was
left your
raised in a
paid job.
ministry family. Yeah, you don't you just don't get paid for it anymore. And so since retiring, I do weekly women's Bible studies, and I like writing. I'm a blogger, so I blog, and yeah, and my husband's retired also, so we're just in that stage of life.
It's a good stage, isn't it?
It's a wonderful stage. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
I
I'm
had no
bored.
idea how wonderful it would be.
Well, I have people that, they're bored. They don't know what to do with themselves. And I'm like, oh, never had that problem.
I know.
So I'd like to see what that's like just once.
When our kids were growing up, we said that they couldn't say the B word. Board was not in our vocabulary. And if you didn't, I could find something for you to do, like clean your room or
Exactly. That's how my mother raised us too. Yeah, you never tell your mom you're bored.
and then they always found something they forgot they had, and then they weren't bored anymore. See, it was a
Right? They found something that was more fun than what we were offering them, right?
exactly. Exactly. So you
Yeah.
had a little bit of interruption in your life with your mom
Yeah.
had dementia.
Right.
Talk to us about that. What was that like for you?
Right. Well, we were in Africa. She was widowed at age 68.
Mm,
And so she lived by herself for 22 years after my dad died. And she was a very strong, very stoic, she was raised on a farm and immigrant parents. And she was a rock. And so living on her own, she was very independent. And she and dad had been in ministry together.
mm,
So when he died, we were still overseas, but I have two brothers that lived in her same town in Pennsylvania. And so they were, checking in on her and looking in on her. And she actually traveled to Africa to visit us even after dad died. She came once without him. So, I mean, she was just that kind of a person, and nothing stopped her. Well, my brothers actually began to see more and more of her changes
mm,
in her mentally. And uh, when we moved back to America, we moved to Kansas. And so I would fly back and forth. Of course, we'd visit mom and everything, but I wasn't there day to day to like notice everything. But there were times when I caught glimpses of something wasn't right,
mm,
and I think what really clinched it, my one brother checked on her twice a day because his office was past her house. So
mm,
he would check in on the way there and on the way back. And, he began to tell me some things that he would go in and the water would be running, or the stove would be on and the pot would be, empty, and um, or she would just odd things, he'd get there after work and she'd be just sitting in the dark, in her living room in her chair. And so he was looking after her the best that he could while working, of course. So then we started to hire a dear sweet Christian lady to come in and spend time with mom, kind of like a companion. And mom always felt like she was the companion lady was just a visitor,
Oh,
that mom was hosting this woman, but they became good friends, and it was okay for a while,
yeah.
but she didn't have anybody there 24/7 to actually see what was going on during the night. And so I think I noticed a few things. Once when I was home, she wanted to go visit her sisters that lived a few hours away. And she had been driving back and forth from there for years previously.
Yeah.
And so I thought nothing of it. Sure, I'll be happy to take you down there. Well, we get partway down there, we're on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and she can't remember where she's going. Like, I'm driving, but I didn't know the way.
Yeah.
And it never dawned on me that my mom was going to not know how to get there.
Yeah.
She did not know how to get there. So it was a very it was an interesting trip. Uh, Eventually I actually pulled off and got off the turnpike and got into the town. I knew that where the town was.
Mhm.
And I actually I saw a mailman in his mail truck. And I knew I was somewhere kind of in the vicinity. So I actually asked the mailman if he knew. Anyway, that was a clue that she can't be driving around anymore by herself because she doesn't know where she's going. So I think it all really came to a head on her 90th birthday.
Mm.
And we all were there to her birthday was always on Mother's Day weekend. And so we always would celebrate Mother's Day and her birthday at the same time. And so we had the grandkids were there, and we had the cake and the flowers and the gifts and everything. And it became very apparent that she had no idea what was going on.
Oh,
And we sang happy birthday and then she goes, "Oh, is that what this is all about?" And then I'm like, "Mom, do you know whose birthday it is?" And she said, "No, I don't." I said, "Well, it's yours."
yeah.
And it's like, she can't be living by herself.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
was just, she had stopped socializing. She had stopped going to church, and church was a huge part of
Right.
her life.
Mm.
Since she met the Lord as a young adult, she's married to a minister, so that church was their life, but
Mm.
she had just stopped going anywhere.
Mm.
And even when someone would want to come pick her up and take her somewhere, she was not socializing anymore at all. And that was not like her.
Yeah.
And it became apparent that not only was she declining, but she was also withdrawing and becoming much more just in her own head. So we decided that she would come live with me. Now, she wasn't ready to go anywhere. She wasn't going to leave the house that she and dad built, and she'd lived there 50 some years. And
That's a tricky transition. That transition thing is real tricky.
but the Lord was so good and so faithful in this. She was willing to come for a visit, but she didn't remember that she was coming for a visit. I mean, it was kind of a funny story, but I flew home, and I had been flying back and forth every 3 months. I was flying back and forth just to check on her during that last year or so. And I asked her, I told her I wanted her to come and stay with me through the winter. And but of course, that didn't register. So I brought her out here on the plane, and that is a whole nother story. I wrote about it. So I'm not going to tell you because it'll take too long, but I wrote about it in this book. But I brought her out here to stay with me. And of course, that was a whole nother thing. I mean, I was still working. I was on church staff. I was working full time. My husband was working full time. And yet we couldn't just leave mom in the house by herself. So the critical time was like at night, because she would get up in the night and her time clock would be all off. So she would get dressed at 3 in the morning, and she would anyway, she lost track of reality, really, time wise. And so we also knew she was in an unfamiliar place. So I didn't want her going out. Um, I didn't want her just letting people in during the day when I was gone. So it was a really interesting time. But she had a really strong faith. She loved God. We had precious times together where every now and then I'd catch a little glimpse of something and I'd think she's back, but then she isn't. You know how that is.
Yep.
And but every night she had this routine. She and Dad used to, I would catch them when I was a kid. If I was out somewhere when I was a young teenager and I'd come in the house and it was evening, I would hear them in their bedroom, and they'd be kneeling by their bed and they'd be praying out loud with each other. And I mean, you hear them praying for us by name, right? Well, even in her dementia, she still prayed for us all by name.
Really?
Even whether she knew who we were or not, she prayed for us, and she got us right. Ruth and Pete, Paul and Deb, Bill and Jeanette, she got the couple's names right.
Wow.
And she kept up her, every night she'd sit on her bed and she'd have her devotions. And it was a sweet time because I would get her ready for bed and everything. And then she would pat the bed beside her and she'd say, sit here. So I'd sit down beside her and she'd have her Bible open, and she'd hand it to me and she'd say, this is where we are, read here. And then I would read whatever she said to read. And then sometimes I would pray and sometimes she would pray. And a lot of times she'd say, you pray tonight. So
Yeah.
I'd pray. And this routine, she never lost that,
Oh,
and
that's so precious.
it is the neatest memory. That the spiritual side doesn't die, you
Yeah.
know, in her spirit. I mean, she was there. God was faithful to her. And she'd say, Ruth, the Lord's been so faithful. And so one day I said, well, Mom, here, your grandchildren gave you this notebook for Christmas that year. They had just given her one. And I said, why don't you start writing down ways God has been faithful?
Yeah.
I would love to read that. Well, as far as she got was God's been faithful. She never wrote another thing in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
But
that's hard.
but it was here.
Yeah.
It was all in her mind and her heart. She still clung to the faithfulness of God. And I think, I was on high alert the whole time.
Mhm.
Um, because it was hard. It was like having a newborn. I don't mean that disrespectfully.
No, no, but it was, yeah.
I had to be constantly listening because she did fall one time in the hallway. She was on the way to the bathroom, and fortunately, it was early in the morning. My husband was still home, and he helped get her up. Um, but I'd hear her at night, so I got her to use a walker in the house, and I would hear the squeak of the wheel, and she was in the bedroom right next to ours, and so I would hear her get up, and so I was always listening.
Yeah.
Is she up? Is she okay? Is she?
Yeah.
And I'd listen until I'd hear her get back in the bed. But so it was a very interesting time. But I think, you know, as people in our stage of life who have elderly parents that are still alive, not all of ours are gone, but I think it's difficult because you're juggling different generations, you
Mhm.
know, grandchildren and great grandchildren and your own adult children who have so much going on in their lives. And then, of course, your parents. And I really firmly believe in the scriptural mandate, to honor your father and your mother.
Mhm.
And so the question always is, what is the best way to honor them?
Yeah.
So in those times when she wanted to go home so badly, home to Pennsylvania, home.
Mhm.
And I mean, the tears, I've been here so long, Ruth. I feel like I've been away so long. And I'd be like, well, Mom, it's just been a week.
Yeah.
It's still winter, which is true. It was. And really, she goes, it's been so long. And I'd say, well, let's just take it a day at a time. I love having you here. And we lived overseas so long. And so a lot of my adult years, I was away, from my family. And so being able to have her I would do it again in a heartbeat. I was going to say
Yeah.
it was a privilege. And
Yeah.
yes, it was hard. And yes, it was hard to see her
Mhm.
not the way she was. But
Mhm.
I think that's a key to caring for an elderly parent, is to remember who they were, not who they are.
Mhm.
and remember them as the people that were so capable and so just full of life and vim and vigor. My first nursing job actually was in uh, long ago when I graduated from nursing school. My first job was in a county nursing home,
Mm.
and I'd see these people, and I'd wonder, who were they?
Mhm.
You know, I mean, this person, this was a vibrant, you know, person that just they had a full life, and you wonder who they were. Well, when we're caring for our parents, we know who they were.
Mhm.
And so just to keep that in mind and to just what will honor them the most. But the problem is sometimes they don't feel like it's very honoring.
Mhm.
Like if she wants to go home, you think the honorable thing would be take
Right.
her home.
Yeah.
But she couldn't live at home.
Yeah.
And the other thing that was a big deal was that she not only was her memory failing and everything, but she was very stressed about money. And she never was stressed about money. My parents, they lived by faith, and and they were they had kids that were in missions that were on support, and they knew what that was like to live, moment by moment, depending on God, right? Now here she is like, I don't know what's happening with my money. I don't know what's happening with my finances. And I don't want to end up living under a bridge in a box,
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah. Yeah.
that would never happen anyway. She has 3 adult children who love her. She would, even if she didn't have any finances, it wouldn't matter, right? Because she has kids. She raised us right. So, but that anxiety about the finances, it's so typical with people with dementia, I think, as they get older and they begin to worry, what am I going to do? How am I going to take care of myself?
Yeah.
You know, and then there's the paranoia, you
Mm.
know, uh, which, that can be a little bit difficult sometimes to manage. She was very sweet though. She would cry because she was sad,
Yeah.
but she could easily, I mean, she would talk to her sister on the telephone, and sometimes she called me her sister, and
Yeah.
sometimes she would tell the one sister that the other sister was sitting here, but it was me and not her. And the minute she might cry, I'm just really, I'm homesick, I want to go home. And then she'd hang up and she'd be happy.
Yeah.
You know? I
Yeah.
mean, so the emotions, there's an emotional roller coaster
Yeah.
that you're on when you're the caregiver. And I think it bothers the caregiver more than the care receiver, because they, from one minute to the next, the emotion changes,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But for the caregiver, you're feeling that I wrestled with, am I doing the right thing?
Mhm.
Did I make the right decision? If she's really unhappy, should I try to get her back to Pennsylvania? And how will we manage that? And should I go there? Or, and so looking back on it, I really did. Like, once she was here until she died. And when she died, I had the privilege of being with her. And my son and I actually were with her in the bedroom here at the house. And I was holding her hand and holding his hand, and and I had my other hand on her, and I had a hand on her and a hand on him. And I said, we're going to pray now. And she was not conscious at the end. And I said, we're going to pray now. And God was just so merciful, because I prayed and I asked God to take her. I mean, she was ready, and
Mhm.
she was that far along. And I had hospice in, and the hospice nurse had said, it's going to be any time now today, and do you want me to stay? And I said, I'll call you when I need you. Why don't you? I wanted that sacred time.
Yeah.
And I prayed, and in my prayer I thanked God for her, and for who she was, and for her love for him and his love for her. And I just asked God to take her. And it was just the most, I get goosebumps, because I finished praying and I said amen. And she took one breath. And we just looked, my son and I just looked at each other, and it's like, that was it.
Uh,
And she was gone.
uh,
And it was amazing and wonderful and sweet and sad.
yeah. Yeah.
All those, you
Mhm.
know, emotions just kind of wrapped up together. And, I took notes, like every day I would write a little note about how the day went during the time she was here. Because my brothers were in Pennsylvania and I wanted us all three, I wanted their input every week. I would then send them the weekly notes in an email so that they could see what was going on and how things were. And they could offer me any suggestions if they had them, or if they thought I was doing something not right or whatever, because I wanted us all to be on the same page. And it is out of those notes that I wrote the book.
I
And
see. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's why I did the book, because I had all these notes, and I wanted, not only did I want my grandchildren to see her as they knew her now, like at this stage in her life. I have three of my grandchildren live here in our town, and they didn't know my mom except in her latter year.
Oh,
And so I wanted them to have stories other than the last year of her life. I wanted them to know. So in the book, I put stories of her before she had dementia, things about my mom that I want in my family. So it's really a kind of a story of mom and her faith walk and the time together. And, interesting thing. I think for the person who's caregiving, one of the unpredictability of this disease is one of the things that just gets you, because you don't know from one minute to the next
mhm.
what the behavior is going to be, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
you went through it, having dealt with it yourself, I'm sure that there was a lot of moment to moment or hour to hour changes and things that go on, and it keeps you on your toes, right? Or on your knees, one or the other, right? Just and then, after the caregiving ends, I mean, I think I think then you wrestle with different kind of feelings, like, you have grief because there's a death, right? But you might even have some relief because
Yeah.
it's over.
Yeah.
But then you might have guilt because you feel guilty because you felt relieved.
Yep.
You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
you might have regret, and you might question, like, were my decisions the right ones? I honestly struggled with that the most, wondering if my decisions were the right ones, wondering if I had known the length of time it was going to be, which was not very long.
Mhm.
I'm talking half a year. She died right before she would have turned 91. So
Oh,
between 90 and 91, from
yeah.
the birthday party until right before like a week before she would have turned 91, I just, I felt like if I'd known it wasn't going to be any longer, should I have moved to her house and stayed with her? Should I have taken a leave of absence and gone to stay with her? Should I have and what helped me though was that my brothers and my husband were so supportive. And we needed that. I know that that's not always true.
Yeah.
In all and families can fight over what to do. And yet my brothers would say, no, Ruthie, you sent us pictures of mom when she was there with you, and she never looked better. She looked so much better and happier and healthier when she was with you. I think it was because she was socializing
Right. Right.
with people,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the other thing, after you're caregiving for any length of time, I don't care how long or short it is, there's that weariness. You don't realize how tired you are,
Yeah.
till you stop.
Hmm.
And then you need that caregiver needs to just take some time
Yeah.
and rest, because sometimes they're running back and forth to care facilities or hospital or whatever, or if they're in your home, you can't sleep at night. And then also I've had people, because a lot of my friends are going through this now, and I have people who, after their loved one has passed away, they feel like they've lost their purpose now, because for the last however long they've defined themselves by the fact that they've been caregiving,
Yeah.
right? Kind of like when a mom's kids all leave the nest, now what?
Yeah. Like an empty nest. Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah. What do I do next? And I think I think that it's important that we're there for one another, that we can have input into each other's lives. You know, I started a caregivers group at our church before I even brought her here to live with us. And I think that was support for those who are caregiving loved ones in facilities or in their home or even long distance, as I was originally. And that way you could bounce things off each other. You could share
Right.
resource
Yeah.
ideas.
Yeah, and that's so important, to be able to share and, oh, that's happening with you too. Oh, phew, it's not just me.
Exactly. I remember asking one time in the group, I'm like, so this is what's happening. Is this normal aging or is this not? You know, even just questions like that, because how do we know? We've not lived through that yet, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I challenge people to do that. I say, get some support, get in a group. And sometimes caregivers can't go to a group because why? They can't leave their person.
Right.
You know, we have to have somebody that can step in to give us a little time away, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is critical. And I think we have to remember the good times. You know,
Yeah.
it's like when you have a baby, you know, and you're going through labor and there's that the pain and all that of labor and everything. But once you have the child,
Yeah.
you know, that the bad times kind of go away and the good time is there, right?
Yeah.
And I think when we look back on the whole dementia is a horrible disease.
Yeah.
It's a terrible thing. I mean, if we could stamp that out, that would be a hallelujah, right?
Right.
But we need to remember the good times also. The
Yeah.
times we laughed. She was so funny. She had an incredible wit, and at times it came out in the most crazy times you never knew when. So the emotions were up and down, and but we laughed a lot together. And that was good. And we did some one time. Oh, I thought maybe it'd be great to do a jigsaw puzzle. Don't all people like to do jigsaw puzzles? Well, I get this puzzle.
Uh-uh.
We're sitting there, we're working on this puzzle. And after a few days of this big old puzzle being spread out all over the table, I said to Mom, do you like doing puzzles? She goes, Not really. I thought to myself,
Oh
I
yeah.
gotta finish this now myself, you
Right.
know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
she wouldn't say anything, she must have been thinking Ruthie must like doing this puzzle, so
I'm gonna do it for my girl.
I'll do it for her or whoever she is.
Yeah, I think some of the things are similar, with my mom was she had her doctorate degree. I mean, she
Yeah,
was, an
so
art
brilliant, right? I mean,
capable and, full of just always learning something new, traveled. She lived in Japan for 3 years so she could study Japanese textiles and dyeing processes and was writing
wow.
on it. Just, I mean, all kinds of things, but her friend, she was living in Florida, which is a little ways from Oregon.
Yeah, a little bit.
And her close friend called me and she says, I'm starting to see some things with your mom. We went out, we're going to meet at a restaurant. She didn't show up for a long while. And we finally figured
Um,
out that she was just lost. She didn't have any idea where she was. And so when we went, my brother and sister and I went out to go visit her just kind of when she had just found out. And it's kind of that part I think is the hardest part because it's like sand slipping through your fingers. What do we need to do before we can't? You
yes, yes,
I mean, one of the first things I did was have her take all of her old photos and tell me who these people are, Colin. None of us know who they are. Your sisters are gone, and there's not, nobody's going to know who any of these are. So I had her label all of these photos. But at the same time, I hear in talking to her friend on the phone in the other room, my kids are here and they are just trying to take everything away from me. They're just like and so there's that kind of little balance where they need to have some agency and make decisions on their own before you do.
yes,
And then even with my mother-in-law, there was this real fine balance between she needs 24-hour care when she was in LA, which is also far from Oregon.
yes, yeah,
So can I can I have somebody come in? And then that was way too expensive. She was going through her money way too fast. So trying to find that, well, I'm not going to pay $25 a day for anybody to come in.
Yeah,
And then, well, honey, I'm not going to tell you how much time.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
But I think the other thing is that to begin with, you kind of expect them to remember things or to know things, you know?
Yeah,
Don't you remember that? Don't you, like where her friend, her sister was or whatever,
right,
and that kind of, and then you have to really stop and go, well, she can't because the
right,
synapses are not working anymore and they're
right,
getting all covered over with calcium and things. And, so it's an actual physical thing. So it's just, my son used to get upset with my mother-in-law, trying to go, well, no, you know how to do this, whatever. Like, and I said, you know what? Now's the time to put your acting career in practice.
there you go.
Wherever they are, you just jump in with that same story and just play it out.
You almost
Whatever
have
way,
to.
whatever
Yes,
way they think it is.
yeah,
But yeah, she eventually came up here for a little while and I had her in a care center close by, but she had fallen. That's a problem. As soon as they fall, whether she
right.
was going to take a photo across of a bird, across, and fell and broke her whole shin bone and ankle and
Oh,
whatever. So she had surgery, and then she never wanted to walk. She could have. She never wanted to walk again. So then it was like, oh, come on, that is not who you are, right?
yeah,
The other thing we noticed was playing cards. We always played rummy, and she couldn't, you know,
couldn't anymore.
couldn't anymore. So that was kind of a thing like so.
Yeah.
But it was sad. But and at the very end, the last time I saw her, she didn't know who I was, but she knew the essence of who I was. And she'd start singing and we would sing together.
Oh,
And she
wow.
knew all the words to the songs and, old songs and we'd sing together. And that was real precious.
I bet that was.
You know,
Yeah, that's meaningful.
I'd
That
say,
doesn't, that's in there. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
it's amazing. The things that you think they're going to remember, they don't, but then they remember things that you wonder,
yeah.
how did they get that back? How did they retrieve that?
I don't know, but it's pretty precious. Yeah.
It is precious.
So,
There was a time when mom said to me, and she had these moments, and one time she said, why can't I don't know why can't I remember? Why can't I remember that? And so I said, well, mom, I said, because she used to work in an office at the camp on the campgrounds. And I said, well, mom, it's kind of like, when you have a filing cabinet and you get all those files in there, and there's so many in there that sometimes it's just hard to retrieve it, to
mhm,
find the one you want. And I said,
yeah,
you've lived a long time and you've got a lot in there. Trying to retrieve it is not always easy anymore.
yeah.
And so that pacified her for the moment,
Well,
you
because
know.
that makes sense. Yeah, it's a way to make sense out of it too. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so we're almost out of time. Show us your book. Tell us the name of your book.
Oh, it's called Bringing Mother Home. I don't know if you can see it. It's
Yeah.
called Bringing Mother Home. It's on Amazon.
Okay.
It's Journeying Together Through the Fog of Dementia. And I take you right up through to when we actually put her in our car after she passed away and drove her to Pennsylvania
Mhm.
to her to have
To
the
her
funeral
home.
to her home. Yeah, we brought her home. We brought her from her home to my home and then to home, and then she went home. you so it is a fog though, dementia. I think it's like fog, it's you get in there and it gets denser and denser and denser, right? And you're journeying with them together,
Mm.
walking through this together. And I think that's so critical and so important. And I have this one verse I think is so great. It's Isaiah 35:3 and 4. It says, strengthen the feeble hands, steady the knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong. Do not fear. Your God will come. He will come with vengeance, with divine retribution. He'll come to save you. And I think, wow, strengthen those feeble knees and do what we can, right? To steady the hands and the knees. And then God's promise in Isaiah 46:4, even to your old age and gray hairs, I am he. I
Mm.
am he who will sustain you. I've made you and I'll carry you. I will sustain you and rescue you.
Oh, I love that.
That
I
that's precious, isn't it, when you think about the elderly? So yeah, I just this was therapeutic for me to write it. It was I cried, I laughed, and it was for family, but it's available for anybody that's interested. There's a tip sheet in here for tips for caregivers, and Anyway,
Oh, precious. Thank you.
thanks for chatting with me.
From the day we're born, we begin a journey. It will be molded by our families, our environments, our beliefs, and motivations. God, as the Alpha and Omega, is with us each step of the way, whether we follow Him or not. Just as we have our own personal journeys, each character in the Bible has theirs. Each have had their own lessons to learn. And higher than that, God has used each one in His ultimate plan. Discovering Your Journey, Finding God in Every Step, is an interactive 6-week study that melds the two together. We begin by mapping the journey of our lives leading up to who we are today. Each week, we will dig deep into the lessons God taught the characters of Ruth, Joseph, Jonah, and David, and compare them to our own journeys as we find where God has been in each step of the way. Discovering Your Journey, Finding God in Every Step includes a study book, a journal, and videos of my own personal stories.